Studies in the Gospel of John. Lesson 12, Healing at Bethesda. Review and quizzing. Take a sheet of paper and try to think through the last 11 chapters of John. Write down 2 or 3 events or significant statements from each chapter. Do the best you can from memory, then open your Bible and make a more complete listing. You want to summarize things so you can remember the main events and surrounding context. Pause the video and complete the assignment. Jesus heals a debilitated man. Read John 5, 1-18. Note the setting, the condition of the man who was sick, what Jesus did in healing the man and in confronting the man, how the man reacts to Jesus' warning, the reaction of the religious leaders, Jesus' explanation, why the religious leaders wanted to kill Jesus. Second Passover. Many manuscripts begin chapter 5 by saying, "After these things was the feast of the Jews," referring to the Passover. This would then be the second Passover mentioned in the Gospel of John, the first being in chapter 2, verse 13. An entire year had passed since Jesus had changed the water into wine at Cana of Galilee. This gives us a better time frame to see how the events from Jesus' baptism in chapter 1 until this point, especially concerning the arrest and execution of John the Baptist, could fit into the sketchy narrative that we have. It was probably a year and a half since Jesus' baptism and John's testimony of what he saw when he pointed Jesus out to those first followers. Since this was the feast, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. This is the third time John reported that Jesus had been in Judea since the beginning of the book. The pool of Bethesda. John reports that there is a pool called Bethesda, having 5 porticos or porches. Could the present tense verb indicate that the temple and the pool were still intact, indicating a date before 70 AD for John's writing? The sheep gate was mentioned by Nehemiah in chapter 3. The rebuilding of the walls was started by the high priest at the sheep gate. The sheep gate was where sheep were brought into the temple area for sacrifice. In 2005, this pool was located by archaeologists. It is, as John reports, near the sheep gate of the temple and has 5 porches. 5 porches. The pool was just north of the temple. It was a rectangle divided by a wall or dike. At Jesus' time, covered colonnades or porches went around the circumference, and the dividing wall also was designed to be a covered porch, making 5 porches in all. Obviously, the author was familiar with the site. The only mention of this pool in ancient writings is this account by the Apostle John. The name Bethesda could mean house of mercy or house of shame, a fitting place for those who were placed there, the sick and deformed, those who were hoping for mercy. Textual addition. In these porticos lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered. And then there's an addition, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in, was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. John 5, 3 and 4. The latter part of verse 3 and all of verse 4, in italics above, are not in the oldest and best manuscript. They seem to have been added by a later 5th century scribe as an explanatory note. He apparently was reporting a theory as to why the stirring of the water in verse 7 was so significant. Later scribes mistakenly copied his note right into the text. Church historian Eusebius, who lived from 260 to 340, supposed that the healing power came in conjunction with red-colored water, which would occasionally flow into the pool. Origen, who lived 185 to 254, and Cyril of Jerusalem, who was bishop there from 350 to 386, wrote of a spring that would flow with a ruddy-colored water in an intermittent fashion. There is a spring that does agitate the water in such a fashion, though the reddish water is no longer in evidence. That's from the article Bethesda in Zondervan Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible. The debilitated man was there. Verse 5 tells us that a certain man was there. The Greek verb indicates ongoing or continuous action, meaning that this man was there customarily, or had been there for some time. He had been sick for 38 years. This information could only have come from someone who had talked with the man. Waiting by the pool was his last hope. What was his affliction? We're not told what his sickness was. It was not simple paralysis or being lame, for these maladies are specifically described by particular words. The word used for this man is a generic word for sickness or weakness. It's actually a compound of the word for strength or robustness with a negative prefix. Thus, it means unstrength, infirmity, or weakness. Whatever had befallen the man, it had left him without strength in his muscles. Yet it was not the same as paralysis. Observation: this man had been afflicted with this weakness longer than Jesus himself had been alive on planet Earth, an entire lifetime. Certainly this man's best years had passed by. Assessing the man's hope. When Jesus saw him, he could easily recognize that he had already been a long time in that condition. He must have been a sorry sight. His muscles must have been atrophied, his clothing and possessions mere rags. The Lord asked him, "Do you wish to get well?" The question was very direct, evidently to probe the man's desire to live life. Was he simply there to await death? Had he totally given up on life, or could hope be awakened in him? Without hope, there could be no faith, no active response to what Jesus would ask of him. The man's explanation. The sick man's explanation for having not been healed was, "I have no man to put me in the pool." Whatever friends or family he may have had long since abandoned him, or could not stay there by the pool to wait for the phenomenon to recur. When the water is stirred up while I am coming, another steps down before me. He had desire, but he lacked ability. His weakness was so severe that he could barely move at all, or at best very slowly. From his remark, it seems that only one person would be healed at a time. Command, faith, obedience. Jesus said to him, "Arise, take up your pallet and walk." Notice that Jesus gave the man something to do. To the man who had been unable to get his body down from the poolside into the water, this would be an impossible task apart from a genuine healing. Faith required action. By his obedience, the miracle would have an immediate outward visible expression. The word translated as walk means more than just to ambulate. It means to walk about ongoingly. It was not a simple stand up and stretch demonstration that Jesus asked for. He was demanding a continual, ongoing demonstration of healing. Made whole and strong. Immediately the man became well and took up his pallet and began to walk about. The Greek for well literally means whole, sound, or healthy. This is not the usual word for healing. It was used of the restoration of the hand that was shriveled in Matthew 12, or of the deformed cripple being made whole in Matthew 15, or of the woman whose flow of blood was stopped in Mark 5, and of the lame man in Acts 3, who was born lame, had never walked, yet was instantly able to jump up, leap, and run about. This man in John 5 not only stopped being afflicted, but now he had the strength and wholeness to get up and carry his cot. Healed on the Sabbath. Now it was the Sabbath on that day. This is very important information for the rest of the account. The Jews, John's way of referring to the religious leaders, were objecting to him working on the Sabbath. The religious teachers had interpreted the commandment about the Sabbath, recorded in Exodus 28 through 11, in such legalistic, confining, and exacting ways that it had become oppressive. It was to be a day where they ceased from their work and focused on God. Its true purpose had become lost in the minutiae of religious tradition. Jesus loosed the Sabbath. Jesus did not break or abolish the fourth commandment, but he did loose the Sabbath from such legalistic restrictions. Ultimately, in him, its purpose is fulfilled. The Sabbath rest can be a way of living, where we cease from our own works and abide in the life of his Spirit. Jesus healed on the Sabbath on numerous occasions. Controversy with the religious leaders over this is recorded in all of the Gospels. Healed man confronted. When confronted by the religious leaders, the healed man said, "He who made me well was the one who said to me, 'Take up your pallet and walk.' I'm simply doing what I was told. He healed me. I did not think I should argue. It was his idea. He was at fault." They asked, "Who is the man?" These leaders want to find out who's responsible for this outrage. But the man who was healed did not know. Beside the fact that Jesus had faded into the crowd was the reality that this man had been out of circulation for years, being confined at the pool. He had had no other opportunity to hear or see Jesus anywhere else. Jesus gave the man a stern warning. Verse 14 tells us that Jesus later found him in the temple. Whether the Lord was actually looking for him or whether he simply came upon him in the crowd, he had a word of warning to speak to him. "Behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore." This sin no longer may imply that his affliction had somehow been related to a previous sin or pattern of sin. Possibly it had been a judgment for the man's sin. If true, it would have been clear to the man that Jesus somehow knew what his sin had been and that he possibly was considering returning to old ways, so that nothing worse may befall you. This would seem to be a very ominous warning indeed, especially in light of the man's experience of the past 38 years. Man turned on Jesus. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus. This seems almost incredulous. Either the man was angered at being confronted about his sin, or he was intimidated by the Jewish leaders. Amazingly, within just a few minutes of his dramatic healing, He betrays the one God had used to heal him. Fair reason to persecute Jesus. For this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. They could not see past their legalistic interpretation to be affected by the wonder of this miraculous healing. Instead of the miracle causing them to question their interpretation of the law or of who Jesus is, they became even more offended and incensed at him. The use of the plural, these things, indicates that this was not the only such incident that the religious leaders were offended by. Jesus' defense, my Father. He answered them. What follows is Jesus' explanation or defense for his actions. My Father is working until now, and I myself am working. The verbs are in the present tense, meaning continual or ongoing action. What Jesus is saying is that the Father has not stopped working. In fact, it was the Father who did this work of healing this man. Jesus was just responding in conjunction with what he saw the Father doing. He did what he did because it's what the Father wanted to do. If anyone had not kept their Sabbath rules, it was God himself. That should give them cause to reconsider their theology. They sought to kill him. For this cause, therefore, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. This was a serious business. This was not simply a matter of personal opinions or debate about interpretations. He was not only breaking the Sabbath, the first offense worthy of death as they saw it, but also was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. This is an important point that John does not want us to miss. These religious leaders heard Jesus speak of his relationship to God in a way that was different than that of others. He evidently claimed a unique sonship that was not the same as other people. An unequivocal claim. This is the first example in this gospel of what is termed an unequivocal claim. This is a clear, unambiguous claim to be God. An unequivocal claim is evident when Jesus' declaration about himself was clearly understood as a claim to divinity by those hearing him, as evidenced by their reactions. Here they are ready to kill him because they clearly understood that he claimed to be equal with God. They were people who spoke the same language, were from the same cultural and religious context. Certainly they would be able to accurately assess when Jesus would make a claim to be God. There are three such claims in this gospel. Jesus' response to their assessment. If Jesus had overstated his case or had been misunderstood, wouldn't you expect him to attempt to correct their misunderstanding? Wouldn't you think he would say something to alleviate their concerns or mitigate their judgment? As you read on in the context from verses 19 to 47, it is clear that he is in fact responding to their assessment of what he had said. But he makes no retraction, nor does he backpedal away from anything he had stated. He only adds fuel to the fire.